Hi guys, it's Brent from Black Crow Gaming here, and I'm here with you this week with another faction-specific weakness video. This week it's the turn of Leagues of Votann. The Leagues are a relatively new army on the 40k scene. They came out mid to end 9th edition, and they have a really interesting aesthetic and playstyle. They play more honest Warhammer than a lot of different factions, so I have a lot of experience playing into them, especially in tournaments and at my local scene. I play against a very good Votann player, so I'm going to try and share with you how I beat him very occasionally. So, with Votann, the biggest thing to realise is they are a new army. And because of that, they have a small player base. In the last week, they had about a 2.5% representation on the table. Now, if you compare this to pretty much any other faction, you're looking at the only armies that are smaller are AdMech, specific Space Marine factions like Death Watch. So they have a small army, and this is important because GW are only really interested in balancing armies to get them in the golden ratio of a 45 to 55% win rate for one build. So because Votann are quite small, they have a small player base, GW aren't going to be putting a lot of resources into balancing them internally. As I'll talk about in a minute, this is quite important because they don't have a lot of internal to balance. So when you play Votann regularly, you pick up what they can do very quickly because there's not a lot that they can do. Good players can get a lot out of them, but you'll only have to remember a very few specific data sheets because they just don't have that many to remember. It's a bit like when you play Space Marines and your opponent knows what you're going to do. They know you've got oaths, they know everything's toughness 4, 2 wounds, 3 up armor save. It's the same with Votann. If you've played them a couple of times, it doesn't really matter what flavour of Votann your opponent brings. You'll know what they're about and how they plan to play. So on the table, they only have little legs. They don't actually. They're movement 6. A lot of their models are movement 6, just like everyone else. Not only that, they have access to scout with a lot of units. They have infiltrating units. And they have good transports. The Sagittar and the Capricus are both excellent transports. They're tough for their points value. They shoot very well. I think they might have the best transports in the game. When I say they've only got little legs, what I'm actually talking about is non-base movement related abilities. So they have very little access to advance and charge and fall back and shoot and charge. That sort of deal. I think the only one I can think of advance and charge is in the Delve Assault Shift with the Berserks, and that is actually a very good ability. It gives them a very high threat range, but it's only for one unit. And this is back to me saying they play honest Warhammer. They have ways of getting into places, but when they're there, movement 6 isn't that fast. They've got the Pioneers are reasonably fast, but they don't have any like jump infantry. They're foot slogging or in transports. Need to play around objectives. So the new army rule isn't grudging. They don't give out grudges anymore. How they work is they have a certain number of tokens, and they get tokens for being on objectives and for holding their home base, yada yada yada. At the start of the game, if you're on an objective, they'll be +1 to hit you. At the end of the game, if they're on an objective, they'll get +1 to hit. And swaps over, normally turn 2 or 3 depending on your opponent. So the first turn or two, they're only weapon skill, ballistic skill 4. So if you've got modifiers and you're not on an objective, it's very easy to neuter their combat or shooting threat. I think the big one for me is if you're not on objective turn 1, if you're popping something like smoke, a lot of their shooting is very unreliable. They do have sustained hits with like the Sagittars, etc. But if you can play around them not being able to hit you, and also late game, if you can play around with like being in places where they can't see you from objectives, they're not going to get that bonus. and it's something to think about. It's something that I always think about once or twice a game, and the rest of the time I let my opponent hit me with like weapon skill 2 Terminators. But it's something you've got to try and play with, and yeah, it's pretty decent. Okay. Hi guys, sorry about that. So as I was saying, they only have a small total unit count. Why is this important? Well, as I said earlier, your opponent will know what everything does, and that is a massive advantage to them, and it reduces the mental load on them to remember everything you've told them at the start of the battle. It's also really important because this edition feels like you look at, say, the defensive and offensive strats of a unit, and then you have to look at its special rule, and the special rule can make or break units. If you look at Grey Knights, a lot of the special rules are bad. So like Rhino gives a really random feel no pain out. Votann are really lucky, and their special rules are fantastic for most units. So for example, Berserk's Fight on Death. But it gives you, with less units total, it gives you a smaller scope of finding new ways to interact with the detachments. So Space Marines have so many units, you might be able to find niche combos that you want to work on. It's harder to do that with Votann. So very few shenanigans. I'm going to try and talk about this quite a lot. Votann movement is fantastic. They have good scouts, especially with transports, and they have those transports also have the ability to split units in half. So warriors, what that means is you can put like half the warrior unit on an objective to try and bait your opponent to come out and shoot them or charge them. And because they're quite high OC, they're 10 OC, they can't just throw a chaff unit and out OC you on there. So they do have this good movement. They also have transports, as I said, very fast. In some, they have access to a very good advance and charge, where they can effectively advance 6 inches in Dwelve Assault Shift and charge. So you're like, that doesn't sound like a weakness, Brent. What are you talking about? Outside of that very good movement, they don't have shenanigans. So they don't have reactive moves. They don't have a lot of lone ops. They don't have move, shoot, move. They play a rolling forward army. They're trying to get on objectives, and I don't think pioneers are as good as they used to be. In the index, you saw them a lot. They used to uppy downy all from the six, once again limited uppy downy from 6 inches from the board edge, whereas you don't see them now. They seem to have gone away, and I think that has taken away quite a lot of their ability to late game correct positional mistakes. If you play Eldar, you know that you're going to struggle to hit units. They're going to fire and fade. If you fall back, they'll move. Votann, for being an army which is a lot of one wound bodies, like Eldar, okay, they're a little bit tougher, but the best defense is not being able to be hit by your opponent. And when Votann go onto objectives, they know you're going to be able to hit them back. Just from the state of the game, the objectives in the middle, you're going to be able to charge them. A good way to deal with this is getting into combat with them very quickly and tagging up their units, maybe using your own infiltrators to block their scout moves. I've always found that to be a really good way of, okay, you sacrifice 2 or 3 scout units turn 1, but then your opponent really doesn't get a turn 2, and you can stage mid-board. It's quite a good strategy to play against Votann. Another thing, as I said, they don't really have uppy downy anymore. They have sticky objectives, which is always nice, but it happens in their command phase, so they have to hold it for a whole turn. They don't have lots of devastating wounds, so they're not going to be able to like mortal you to death. It's not going to be like playing Thousand Suns, where they just have movement after movement. They've got to play within the base rules of the game. They are good at that, But if you're playing, it does mean they're vulnerable to armies like Eldari. Even Tau have more movement shenanigans than them at the moment, which is what it is. So when you're playing Votann, if you can play around the objectives early game, if you can rush them and try and tag them down early, they don't have the most units in the game because they're not the cheapest units. Then you should be able to control the board, and if you can control the board, their reserves will be coming in at the backfield, and that means, as I said, they're not going to be able to push forward as quickly as other armies can. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you disagree with anything I said and said, Brent, you know nothing about Votann, bah, please tell me. I don't mind. Bye, guys.